What's going on, you guys? It's your Huggable Hipster here, and welcome back to today's video where we are reviewing the game Vampyr. This is my third time recording this because I just can't seem to talk today. The sick, dying, and deceased are all abandoned and rotting in the town square. Chaos loves company, and the one person that can save them isn't even alive. The June 2018 release of Vampyr is a semi-open world game where the player takes on the role of a distinguished doctor/blood-drinking vampire. Our mission throughout the game, however, isn't so simple as the premise where we are placed in London 1918 during the Spanish influenza. The only choice we have: to save lives, to kill, or to satiate the hunger that dwells within. This game took the Spanish flu and turned it into the vampire epidemic. At least that's what I got from everything, where the doctor disguised the entire Spanish flu, basically saying that, oh, it's vampires. It's not flu, it's vampires. Which, it's clever and simple enough to grasp, but whenever you look underneath all the layers and everything and research to the names of the characters, research a lot of what's in here, it's a lot more in-depth than meets the eye. There are a lot of layers that go unnoticed that I've seen written hastily by online consumers of the game, that whenever I go into actually buying a game that I'm unsure of but I kind of want to get, I tend to read the reviews first, and since these reviews were so all over the place, I just took the leap and bought it. Needless to say, I went rogue and I bought it without even thinking. I will say right off the bat, I thoroughly did enjoy the game. It really did take the already rich history of the Spanish influenza and put a lot of elegance and accuracy within it as much as they possibly could. Even though it is a horror game, I feel like they tackled the subject matter with grace. Issue remains, though, that everything else that the game has with the vampire lore, completely inaccurate. It was inaccurate, it was misleading, and I'm afraid that someone who comes along and plays this game are going to think that, oh, all of these things about vampires are true because Hollywood has told this to me, media has told this to me, everyone under the sun has told this to me. Vampires are more so of a lore than a mythos. Now, for those of you who are curious on what the difference is between a lore and a mythos and everything, is that a lore is more or less all facts or traditions about a peculiar subject have been accumulated over time, where a myth is traditionally a story that embodies a certain type of belief. So the Bible, not to step on any toes, could be considered mythos to an extent, because it is something that has been embodied throughout religion and throughout history. Now, this is not to offend anybody what I'm about to say next, but a lot of people don't really know the difference between lore and mythos, and they think they're the same thing. That's why they assume that vampires are myths or vampires are lores, because they don't take the time and go in and say that, oh, this is a myth or this is a lore. They're completely different things. Because they see myth and they're like, oh, mythic, vampire, magic, all that kind of stuff. Now, it's a lot more in-depth than that, and I feel like people tend to get confused when it comes to lore and myth and everything like that, but there is a distinct difference. Now, just to explain briefly why this entire game, this entire lore means so much to me, is because during the final semester of my senior year of college, I wrote a 36-page thesis on the psychology of history of vampires. Considering the fact that all of the psych students had to finish a thesis, actually had to do a thesis in general for their requirements to graduate from college, I wrote mine on vampires. I didn't want to be that one student who was going to be bored to death by writing a thesis on how much sugar kids consume during a year. I wanted to do something that I was fascinated by, and I knew my professors would be fascinated by too, even though they were mocking me behind my back. I'll never forget my professor who actually heard my entire thesis proposal, and he was like, okay, I'm down to do it. He was the one professor, I'm not going to say his name out of privacy, but he was the one professor and guidance counselor in school terms, not in mental health terms, who was very much on board for whatever I wanted to create, because he knew that I was doing it from a place of wanting to learn more about it instead of just doing it to get a passing grade. So let's first discuss the history of it and why I believe that the game was so careless in its approach to the vampire lore. Now, in the game, there were different names that were given to different types of vampires. A Scal was a lower level vampire. An Ekon, much like a human, had a sense of who they were, where they were, had cognitive abilities to be able to function like a human. Nimrod, similarly to an Ekon, had cognitive ability and cognitive awareness, but they were a little more brutish in how they were developed and who they are naturally. These names do not appear in vampire lore, so if you are going to search for the term Ekon, if you're going to search for the term Skal or Nimrod, you won't find them in vampire lore. Then I have different clubs and leagues of vampires. There are red-horned vampires that do not exist in the lore, but they only exist in the game. All these different names that you'll see in the game, from Club Ashkelon to a Skal, they have their place in the game, but they're absolutely meaningless in how they correlate in the vampire lore and culture. For example, a Skal is Old Norse for dish bowl. I mean, unless the dev wanted to say that a Skal is comparative to a dish bowl because they're so stupid, then I mean, that could work, but I highly doubt that was the case. Now, Club Ashkelon is another one that is actually a word from a place in Israel right off the coastal line of the Mediterranean. I can see the significance of this name more so in the game because there was the Battle of Ashkelon that took place in 1099. And this battle is often considered the last action of the First Crusade, so it does make sense that this is called what it is in this game because it is representative of war and bloodshed, and it fits quite nicely. Now, within my studies of vampire lore, it dates back to the 1700s, roughly. There is a lot more stuff before that, but this is when it was truly really consistently documented. Now, the vampire lore has been played around with by storytellers, by Hollywood, and it got turned into this laughing fest of fearing garlic, blessing water, and having no reflection, as if a creature with masks could be invisible. I did find it interesting, however, that the authors of this game, or the writers, I should say, of this game, put in the Arthurian legend. Now, the red demon that Jonathan encounters before several pivotal points in the game, its name is Merdin. Now, Merdin is actually a figure in a medieval wealth legends, where he was a prophet and a madman. Now, Merdin was introduced into the Arthurian legend by Geoffrey Monmouth as Merlin the Wizard. It's stated in the research that I did, he went mad after the Battle of all these names that are coming up are going to be in here because I cannot pronounce any of them. He went mad after the Battle of Afterdid and Arthuret, which Rhetoric Heel and Stredencloud defeated Gwenenlau. That's not the way you're supposed to pronounce any of them, I know that, and I am so sorry for botching that up. Now, according to more of my research, Merdin fled into the forest, which he then lived with the animals and received the gift of prophecy. In the game, Merdin is the red demon that is somewhat a prophet and does tell Jonathan the evil and horrible things that are going to be occurring in London. So in a sense, this Merdin red-horned demony figure is the Merlin to Jonathan. Because as we all know, Merlin took King Arthur under his wing and prepared him to be the king that he was. Which I'm not comparing Jonathan Reed to King Arthur at all, but that's kind of the similarities that I'm seeing context and story-wise. And with this kind of, not just predictive storyline, but the way that they kept your attention, I felt enthralled by the fact that Jonathan had a personal vendetta against the one that sired him, against him being a blood-sucking fiend. I mean, in which universe do we not see a brooding vampire? Sinking our teeth into the next topic that we're going to be discussing, the similarities between Blood Rain and this game. There's a lot of similarities in an instance where the attacking mechanisms, where you see, and this is the first time I actually saw this in another game, where it's a ghost attack, where it's the ability to have the ghost version of yourself, or actually the enemies can do it too, which I never saw that before. I only saw in Blood Rain where you could do the ghost attack ability since you were the vampire attacking other vampires and creatures and everything, where a ghost version of the vampire can attack the other person, which I found this very interesting because there aren't really a lot of different vampire games. There's Vampire Masquerade, there's the Buffy the Vampire Slayer games, there's the Blood Rain games, and now there's this one. Now, as far as mechanics go, I will say this. There are bugs. There are very obvious bugs within the game. Loading screens are it was an ongoing theme throughout my streams that as long as the loading screens were up, I had enough time to finish my coffee and my breakfast. That's how long the loading screens were. Also, fast travel. It's not a thing in the game, but it needs to be. It needs to be. It's ridiculous, honestly, how much I got lost within the game when I was right on my target and I kept checking my map and I'm just like, where am I? I'm here, but I'm not. It didn't make sense. Now let's dive into the final point that I want to make, and it has to do with the Hippocratic Oath. It's one of the more important elements that lingers throughout the air in this entire game. It's one of the more important points, I feel, with this game. Being a doctor who is also a vampire has to pose a few ethical issues. The oath is a long one, but the Hippocratic Oath in its simplest form is first, do no harm. How do you do that with a vampire and you still have this overwhelming thirst to quench in a way. It's one of the harder hitting questions that's sitting in the air while you're playing the game, and throughout the game, do you kill or do you save? The fact that you can make numerous amounts of choices, there are endless possibilities within this game that dictate the ending bode well for the Hippocratic Oath itself. Since in the real world, you have the ultimate choice to do harm or to not do harm at all, which the developers make very clear within this game that it is your choice and your choice alone that affects others in the end. But that was my review on Vampyr. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I enjoyed this game. The next one that we are actually currently playing right now on the Twitch channel is Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and let me just say, that game, so fun so far. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys like my face and what I do, please be sure to subscribe and hit that bell down below, because I make videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 a.m. EST. Stay casually nerdy, you guys, and I will see you all in the next video. Peace.